I wasn't invited to Christmas. My son didn't yell, didn't cry. He just looked at me like a stranger and said, "We don't want you there." I told him I understood, but the truth was, I didn't. Not until Christmas morning, when I sat in a silent apartment with a wrapped gift no one would open. The TV played muted carols over a news segment I tried not to watch. The host's voice was warm, the story anything but. Another family losing their child because they couldn't afford the new insulin prices. I recognized the figure on the screen, not the child, but the number. It was mine. My signature had made it real. I'd built a career on telling myself I was securing the future. For my wife, Lynn, for our kids, Noah and Grace. Every late meeting, every missed birthday, every broken promise was a temporary sacrifice. Someday, I'd be the father they deserved. But someday never came. And now, my name was about to be everywhere for reasons that would make my children despise me even more. I could sit here, let the silence grow heavier, or I could do one thing, one honest thing, before the year ended. My hands shook as I reached for my laptop. The resignation letter started as a few words, then a confession, then something bigger. I didn't know if it would fix anything. I just knew it might be the last chance I'd ever have to prove to them that I could still choose family. Even if they didn't want me at Christmas, I was born into a house where winters smelled of kerosene and rust, where the walls hummed with the sound of my father's hands working a lathe long after the sun went down. He used to tell me that calluses were proof of a man's worth. I took him at his word, but I also decided my own hands would stay soft. Education became my escape route. Community college, a scholarship, late nights under fluorescent library lights, and eventually an MBA from a school that charged more per semester than my father had earned in a year. It was during those years I met Lynn. She had an easy laugh and eyes that didn't flinch when I talked about the life I wanted. A family, a home without leaks, a bank account with more than 2 digits before the decimal. We married just after I landed my first job in pharmaceutical sales, a position with a base salary that felt obscene compared to the wages I'd grown up around. From there, everything moved fast. I had a knack for reading people, for turning hesitation into contracts. Promotions followed, each one wrapped in the applause of my superiors. We bought a modest house, then a larger one. Noah was born in the spring, Grace in the fall 2 years later. I told myself I was building something for them, a fortress they'd never have to question. Every missed dinner, every delayed vacation was a stone in that wall. The year I became vice president, a proposal crossed my desk. A pilot program to lower the cost of a critical drug in underserved communities. The numbers showed it would save lives. They also showed it would shave a few points off our profit margin. My job, I told myself, was to protect shareholder value. I sent it back with a note, not aligned with current priorities. I didn't think about the patients. I thought about the quarterly report. At home that night, Lynn kissed me on the cheek and asked how work was. I said, "Busy," and left it at that. By then, my days had begun to stretch, spilling into nights and weekends. Early mornings turned into airport runs, late returns into empty kitchens. I learned to measure my children's growth through photos Lynn texted me between meetings. Noah lost his first tooth while I was in Chicago. Grace learned to ride a bike while I was at a conference in Dallas. I promised myself I'd make it up to them. Someday. Lynn stopped asking when I'd be home. She planned birthdays without checking my schedule, booked family outings without mentioning them, and when I noticed, she'd say gently, "I figured you'd be busy." At first it stung, then it became a relief. less guilt to carry, fewer promises to break. One Friday, after a week of back-to-back meetings, I wrapped up early and decided to surprise them. I pictured walking through the door to Noah's grin, Grace's hug, Lynn's raised eyebrows in that way she had when she was caught off guard. Instead, I turned onto our street, just in time to see a man I didn't recognize pulling into our driveway. He got out, walked around to open the passenger door, and helped Lynn out. Grace climbed out of the back seat, smiling. For a moment, the air went cold in my lungs. I stood there, halfway out of my car, watching. Lynn was laughing at something he'd said. Noah came out from the garage holding a basketball, waved at the man, and they exchanged a few words before heading inside together. My first thought was the obvious one, the one any husband would have in that instant. I walked in minutes later, trying to steady my voice. Lynn introduced him as Mark, our neighbor 2 houses down. The car had broken down while she was running errands, and he'd helped tow it back and fix it in his garage. Everyone seemed perfectly at ease. No one had thought to call me. No one had thought I should even know. That, more than the sight of another man in my driveway, hit me. I had become peripheral. My absence was not an event anymore. It was the default. The rhythms of their lives played on, with or without me, and they didn't expect me to notice the difference. I told myself it was just a busy season, that the next promotion would give me breathing room, that all of this was temporary. But part of me knew better. Once you start living outside the frame of your own family's picture, it doesn't take long before they stop leaving space for you at all. If there was a moment when Lynn stopped seeing me as her partner, I didn't notice it at the time. What I did notice was how well she seemed to manage without me. The calendar on the fridge became a universe I didn't orbit. Parent-teacher conferences, dental appointments, weekend trips to visit her sister, each neatly written in her handwriting. None of them ever brought up to me. She grew into her independence like it was a coat that had been waiting in the closet all along. She handled the mortgage payments, the car maintenance, even the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. I told myself it was impressive, that she was strong, but the truth was simpler. She had learned not to rely on me. The kids followed her lead. Noah started going to the park with friends, staying out later, leaving me polite, clipped updates when I asked. Grace, still young enough to need rides, began arranging them with neighbors or Lynn's colleagues. I didn't see the small goodnight rituals disappear. Didn't hear the absence of my name when they talked about their days. Grace surprised me one Sunday morning by mentioning she had been volunteering at a community clinic after school. She described handing out juice boxes, reading to kids while their parents waited for appointments, sorting through donated medical supplies. Her voice lifted when she spoke about a boy her age who came in every week for insulin shots. "He's funny," she said, "but he's been really sick lately. His mom says they might have to move because they can't afford the new prices." I nodded, told her it was admirable work. Inside, something tensed, though I didn't know why. I didn't ask for the boy's name, didn't make the connection. Not yet. Opportunities to close the gap with them came and went, and I seemed to miss everyone. Lynn suggested a weekend trip to the mountains. "It's been years since we've all done something together," she said, her eyes searching mine. I checked my phone, pretended to look at my calendar. "I'll see what I can do." I never did. When Grace's art show was scheduled for a Thursday evening, I promised her I'd be there. The morning of, my assistant added an impromptu strategy meeting with a potential client. It ran long. By the time I made it to the school, the hall was empty, her drawings already taken down. The last and clearest chance came from Noah. He approached me in the kitchen one night, leaning against the counter like he'd rehearsed it. "I've got a winter concert next Friday," he said. "Would be cool if you came. I'm doing a solo." His tone was casual, but I knew enough to hear the hope under it. I told him I'd be there. That Friday afternoon, an urgent call came from corporate, a potential merger, a need for my input on pricing structures. The meeting bled into evening. I didn't call, didn't text. I told myself I'd explain later, that he'd understand. When I walked in close to midnight, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Noah was at the kitchen table, still in his dress shirt. His trumpet case sat open beside him. Without a word, he pulled a folded newspaper from his pocket and slid it across to me. The headline hit like a fist. "Insulin prices soar. Families forced to ration." There was a quote from a company spokesperson, one I'd written myself months earlier. My name wasn't in the article, but the policy was mine. The photograph was of a boy in a clinic chair, his smile thin and forced, an IV in his arm. I didn't need Grace to tell me it was her friend. Noah's jaw was set. "That kid's been in Grace's class since 4th grade, he said. "She's been trying to help him. You signed off on this?" His voice didn't crack, but his eyes gave him away. Hurt layered over disbelief. I tried to start with, "It's complicated," but he was already on his feet, chair scraping back. "Forget it," he said, leaving the newspaper on the table. The front door closed behind him harder than it needed to. I stood there with the article in my hand, the quiet pressing in. For years, I had justified my choices as sacrifices for my family's future. Now I could see them for what they were. Trades I made without their consent, deals that bought nothing they valued. And the worst part was, I had no idea if there was still anything left to salvage. The invitation to the holiday gala sat on my desk for weeks. Heavy cardstock embossed in gold. It wasn't just another event. It was where they'd be announcing my promotion to senior vice president. The timing was terrible, scheduled for Christmas Eve, but I told myself it was symbolic, the perfect way to close out the year. Lynn had mentioned, almost in passing, that she and the kids were hosting Christmas dinner at the house. "You could come," she'd said, the words hanging between invitation and challenge. I'd nodded without committing. On the morning of the gala, I watched her and the kids load groceries into the car. Grace waved without smiling. Noah didn't look up from his phone. I told myself they'd be fine without me for one more night. I told myself this promotion was the final step before I could slow down. The ballroom was a cathedral of glass and chandeliers, the air thick with the perfume of money and ambition. I shook hands, made small talk, felt the familiar hum of being exactly where I was meant to be, or at least where I'd worked my whole life to be. When they called my name, the applause rolled over me like warm water. I stepped onto the stage, smiled for the cameras. Behind me, the giant LED screen flickered as a live news feed replaced the company's logo. At first, I thought it was part of the presentation. Then I saw the headline, "Pharma execs under investigation for insulin price hikes." My own photograph appeared beside it, cropped from a company retreat, my name in bold beneath. The reporter's voice cut through the speakers, detailing how internal memos had surfaced, linking me to the final approval on pricing changes that left thousands without affordable access to the drug. The applause had stopped. The room was silent except for the broadcast. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, could see phones lifted, recording. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, a text from Lynn. "The divorce papers are on the kitchen table. I left before dessert. before the official announcement of my promotion that now would never come. The cold night air outside the hotel bit through my tuxedo. I drove home without turning on the radio. When I walked into the house, Lynn was waiting in the living room, the papers in a neat stack on the coffee table. Noah sat on the arm of the couch, arms crossed. Grace was in the armchair, knees tucked under her chin. Lynn spoke first. "Do you even know what you've done?" I tried to answer, but Grace's voice cut in, brittle and shaking. "That boy I told you about at the clinic, he was my friend, Dad. He died last week." She swallowed hard. His mom couldn't afford the new price. They tried to stretch what they had left. He didn't make it. The room seemed to tilt. I reached for words, any words, but all that came out was, "I didn't know." "That's the point," Lynn said. "You never ask. You never see." Noah's eyes were burning into me. "I almost dropped out of school last semester to start a lawsuit against your company. Grace talked me out of it, said maybe you'd figure it out on your own. She was wrong." The air in the room was thick with years of unsaid things. They took turns speaking, listing birthdays, concerts, milestones I'd missed, and now, a life I'd helped end. Every rationalization I'd ever used fell apart under the weight of their words. "I thought I was doing this for us," I said finally, my voice thin. "You were doing it for you," Lynn said. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. "We don't need your money. We needed you." For a moment, no one spoke. Grace was the one who broke the silence, her voice softer now. "It's not too late, Dad, but you have to choose. For real this time." It was the smallest sliver of hope, a flicker I didn't deserve but couldn't ignore. I looked at all three of them, knowing that if I didn't act now, that flicker would go out for good. The morning after the gala, I sat at my desk in the home office I'd barely used for anything but catching up on work at night. The divorce papers were still on the coffee table. I didn't know if they were meant as a warning or an inevitability, but I knew what would happen if I didn't move. I opened my laptop, stared at the company logo on the login screen, and typed my resignation. No negotiations, no conditions, just a blunt acknowledgement that I could no longer be part of what we'd built. I sent it directly to the board and the CEO, bypassing the PR department. Then I drafted a statement for the press, one I knew would burn every bridge I had left. I admitted my role in approving the insulin price hike and detailed the internal memos, naming the executives involved. When the story broke, it wasn't just my name in the headlines. It was my face, my signature on the documents. Overnight, I went from respected executive to whistleblower. My phone lit up with messages. Some called me brave, others called me a traitor. A few were death threats. The company's stock dipped, and I told myself I'd done the right thing. 2 days later, the counterattack came. A press release from the company claimed I had personally profited from the policy I'd condemned. They cited undisclosed performance bonuses and implied my sudden moral awakening was nothing more than a PR stunt after I'd been caught. Screenshots of my financial statements began circulating online. Selective, misleading, but convincing enough to anyone who already wanted to believe the worst. The fallout was immediate. Old colleagues stopped returning calls. Even some of my friends kept their distance, afraid to be associated with me. Reporters camped outside the building. Lynn stopped answering my texts altogether. When I saw Noah in the driveway one afternoon, he nodded stiffly but didn't speak. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place I'd once thought I'd left behind forever. The rooms were bare, the air faintly smelling of dust and old paint. The silence was heavier there, without even the distant sounds of my family moving through another part of the house. I tried to show them I was serious. I started volunteering full-time at the clinic where Grace had worked, doing whatever needed doing, stocking supplies, cleaning, answering phones. I told no one about it. I didn't want it to be another gesture they'd think I was performing for attention. But the suspicion in their eyes lingered. When I tried to talk to Lynn, she would listen politely, say she appreciated my efforts, and then pivot to a neutral topic, as if keeping me at arm's length was the only safe option. The media didn't help. Every time I made progress, another opinion piece or online thread popped up accusing me of self-interest. I'd scroll through the comments until my stomach turned. He's just trying to save his image. You don't suddenly grow a conscience after 30 years. It was in the middle of one of those nights, when the city was quiet and the only light came from the muted glow of the street lamps, that I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Grace stood there in her sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back, eyes tired. She didn't say hello, just stepped inside and sat on the couch. From her pocket, she pulled out a small, worn piece of fabric, a knitted scarf, faded blue with a loose thread at one end. "This belonged to Daniel," she said, "the boy from the clinic. He gave it to me last winter, said it was lucky." She looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring something invisible. "When he got sick again, I promised I'd give it to someone who could actually make a difference. I thought that would mean someone at the clinic, maybe a doctor. But—" She hesitated, then held it out to me. "If you're really different now, if you're not just saying it, keep it. Don't give it back until you've done something that would make him proud." I took the scarf, feeling its weight in a way that had nothing to do with fabric. "I can't promise I'll be perfect," I said quietly, "but I can promise I won't stop trying." She nodded once, stood up, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused. "Mom doesn't know I'm here, and Noah still doesn't believe you, but I wanted you to know. I think you can change. I just don't know if you will." When she left, I sat there with the scarf in my hands, the air still carrying the faint scent of her shampoo. The company could smear me, the public could hate me, and my friends could vanish. But here was something I hadn't expected, a challenge from my daughter, and with it, the smallest thread of trust. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was working for a promotion or a title. I was working for that scarf and for the chance to hand it back to her someday, not as an excuse but as proof. The clinic opened at 8, but I was always there by 7. The work wasn't glamorous, mopping floors, organizing supply closets, making coffee for the nurses, but it was steady, honest, and nothing like the life I'd left behind. The patients came in with faces I couldn't forget. Mothers calculating how many days they could stretch a vial of insulin. Kids pretending not to notice their parents' anxiety. Every time I saw the little plastic syringes, I thought of Daniel. I'd catch myself wondering if lowering the price 6 months earlier might have kept him out of the obituary pages. That question didn't go away. I didn't want it to. One rainy Tuesday, I was refilling the paper towel dispensers in the hallway when I heard the creak of the front door. I turned, expecting one of the nurses. Instead, Noah stood there, hands in his hoodie pockets, water dripping from his hair. "I had an early class nearby," he said, like he owed me an explanation for being in my orbit. His eyes scanned the clinic, then landed on me with the mop in my hands. "Didn't think I'd find you here this early." "I like to get a head start," I said. I didn't tell him I'd been avoiding the busier times of day when it was easier for people to recognize me from the news. He lingered by the doorway, watching as I wrung out the mop and moved to another section of the floor. No cameras, no one else in the room, just him and me. "You're not taking pictures or anything?" he asked. I shook my head. Nothing to post, just work to do. Something in his expression shifted, barely, but enough for me to see it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it wasn't contempt either. "Grace said you've been here a lot," he said. Didn't believe her. "I'll be here as long as they'll have me," I replied. He didn't say goodbye when he left, but he gave me a nod before stepping back into the rain. It was more than I'd gotten from him in months. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us closed by inches. Lynn still kept her guard up, but she didn't stop me from seeing the kids. Grace would drop by the clinic sometimes with snacks for the volunteers. Noah started sending the occasional text, short but not perfunctory. One Friday afternoon, Lynn called. "We're thinking about going to the park on Sunday," she said. "Picnic, maybe a short hike, if you want to come." Her voice was neutral, but the offer was real. On Sunday, I brought sandwiches and a cooler of sodas. We spread out a blanket under a wide oak tree. Grace showed me photos from her school trip. Noah kicked a soccer ball around, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own family. Halfway through the afternoon, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but the caller ID stopped me. My attorney. I stepped away from the blanket and answered. "Congratulations," he said. "The court ruled in your favor. They're ordering the company to pay damages, significant ones. 8 figures, Calvin. You can rebuild your life with this." I looked back at Lynn and the kids, sitting together in the shade. "What happens if I don't take it?" I asked. There was a pause. "It's your money to refuse. But why would you?" "Because it's not mine," I said. "Not really." I hung up and walked back to the picnic. Lynn raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "They wanted to give me a lot of money," I said, sitting back down. "I told them to give it to the Patient Assistance Fund instead." Grace's eyes widened. "All of it?" "All of it." Noah looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether this was another performance. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and went back to tossing the soccer ball in the air. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and laughing in uneven bursts, like a language we were relearning. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. It's strange how quickly life can shrink and still feel bigger than it ever did. My apartment lease ended, and instead of finding something grand, I moved into a modest house not far from Lynn and the kids. It wasn't about reclaiming space. It was about being close enough for Sunday dinners, school plays, and the small, unremarkable moments that make up most of a life. A year ago, my days were built around meetings, projections, and the ticking clock of quarterly earnings. Now they revolved around morning coffee, checking the weather for a family hike, and volunteering at the clinic 3 days a week. I still remembered the numbers, the margins, the strategies, but they no longer felt like the measure of me. I learned that money could buy medicine, but it couldn't buy the years I'd missed. It couldn't rewind the mornings I left before Noah woke up, or the evenings I returned after Grace was asleep. It couldn't purchase trust. Only show up over and over could do that. One morning in early November, an email arrived from an unfamiliar government address. The subject line read, "Advisory Role Proposal, Department of Health and Human Services." The message was polite, formal, and almost surreal. They wanted me to serve as a policy advisor on prescription drug pricing. I read it twice, then a third time. The part of me that had lived for titles and recognition stirred, eager to step back into a position of influence. But another part, one that had been painfully grown over the past year, asked the harder question. At what cost? That evening, I sat across from Lynn in her kitchen while Grace did homework and Noah rummaged through the fridge. I told her about the offer. "You'd be good at it," she said carefully. "I'd be gone a lot," I replied. She didn't argue. She just looked at me, waiting to see if I understood what I was risking. The next day, I wrote back to the department. I'd accept on the condition that I could work part-time, remotely, and only in ways that wouldn't compromise my commitment to my family. I expected them to push back. Instead, they agreed. It wasn't the kind of victory I would have celebrated before, but it was one that let me keep what mattered most. By December, the house felt alive in a way I hadn't known in years. We decorated a small tree, its ornaments mismatched and chipped in places. Grace played holiday songs on the piano, and Noah helped me hang lights along the porch. Lynn baked pies with the windows fogged from the oven heat. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was part of the picture. Christmas morning arrived with the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sound of wrapping paper tearing. We weren't surrounded by expensive gifts, but by something that felt rarer: ease. There was no undercurrent of tension, no silent accounting of what had been lost. After breakfast, I went to refill my coffee and saw Noah standing by the fridge. He was holding a folded newspaper. My stomach tightened until I realized it wasn't today's edition. It was the one from a year ago. The headline splashed across the front: "Pharma exec resigns, blows whistle on holiday." Without a word, he smoothed it out and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet. Then, taking a pen from the counter, he wrote just below the headline, "The year Dad came home." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting the words settle in, heavier than any accolade I'd ever received. He glanced over his shoulder and gave me a small, almost shy smile before walking back to the living room. That night, after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, I sat alone for a while. I thought about Daniel's scarf, still folded neatly in my dresser, and the promise I'd made to Grace. I thought about the families at the clinic, the quiet determination of the volunteers, and the chance I'd been given to help fix, in some small way, the damage I'd been part of creating. But more than anything, I thought about how my life had changed, not because of one grand gesture, but because of 1,000 small choices to show up. Choices to listen, to stay, to turn down the meeting in favor of the moment. The road back hadn't been straight, and it hadn't been quick. There were still moments when old habits whispered, tempting me with the rush of achievement and the safety of routine. But then I'd remember the look in Noah's eyes that morning by the fridge, the way Grace had handed me that scarf, the quiet steadiness in Lynn's voice when she said, "We're glad you're here." Legacy, I realized, isn't built in boardrooms or etched into balance sheets. It's written in the hearts of the people who will tell your story when you're gone. And if I was lucky, mine would begin with this year, the year I finally came home.